Hi there, welcome to episode 50. Feels kind of milestone-y. Episode 50 of the ChessTDD series. And in this one, you can see me adding a Trello card as we speak. I had alluded last time to the idea that I kind of wanted to reboot and take a fresh crack at implementing castling. And what I've done here, I've been doing some other screencasts and actually a little bit of software development work, so you might call me a C-sharp programmer once again, and that's why I had it back to the 10 size here, but fear not, I'm not going to leave it there, nor will I make it 41. So we're back at 14 and ready to go. And I engage in a bit of design trade-off here. I'm doing something in this episode that makes me wince a little bit, which is I'm going to have a method, a class that is exclusively in charge of inspecting a board and determining whether or not castling is an option. Now, that sounds pretty innocuous, I'd imagine, but the thing that I don't like about it is it's going to be used in the inside of the board class where you say board get moves from. I'm going to instantiate this thing, at least in the beginning. I'm going to instantiate this thing and then pass it, the board that's calling it. So that's something I generally steer people away from as a design approach, which is that's not an appropriate decoupling. If you have one class that instantiates another one, passes a this pointer, for those of you that, passes a reference to itself in, and lets that thing that it's referring to operate on it. That's a dependency cycle. At the class level, it's not necessarily the kind of problem it might be at the namespace or especially module level. But that's such a degree of coupling between these two things that I would argue that they probably ought to be the same class. However, board is getting pretty unwieldy. And what that's telling me, the fact that this is going to make my life a lot easier, is telling me that maybe I haven't reasoned about my dependencies in the best way. And I'm not, for fear of being too hard on myself, it's often really difficult to know up front how you should structure your dependencies. That's why you have this large unit and acceptance test suite, because that lets you make changes like this without being too worried. So I don't know whether I will do the refactoring that I'm alluding to here that's going to have to come eventually to get rid of this cycle. I don't know whether I'll do that in the product I'm going to build out of this or whether I'll do it as part of this series. I'm going to kind of see how it goes. So anyway, the long story short, a lesson to take away is do as I say, not as I do. What I'm doing here is not great. To have board that knows about this new class I'm creating and to have this new class know about board. The only justification I have here is to say that it is all right, permissible, whatever you want to call it, to do that as an interim step. Your code is not always going to be perfect. There will be times where you have to do something in the meantime, whether it's part of refactoring or whatever, an interim step that's not great to get somewhere better. And I can tell you right now that some of the way I've been trying to handle en passant and now castling is just growing beyond the original plan that didn't include those special edge case moves. And, hey, the original plan got us where we'd implemented the vast majority of a chess game. So, it's not the worst, but sometimes you need to be able to pivot, as it were. What you're seeing me do here isn't the most interesting thing in the world because, as usual, I hadn't recorded an episode in a while, and I was trying to remember kind of what my entry points were and where. So you're just kind of seeing me figure out what should I call this new thing that I'm building, where will I invoke it, and that's going to tell me a little bit about what the arguments to it should be. Should it have state? And what I settled on that you're going to see here shortly is that I want to have this class called Castling Status Checker. And what I envision doing is passing it a board in the constructor and then calling a method and saying, in essence, what are my castling options? So what I was thinking through there is, how do I express that exactly? What are my castling options? Two things came to mind. Number one, I could basically have 4 different methods that return Boolean to say, can I do a white queenside castle? Can I do a white kingside castle, black queenside, black kingside? And then each of those would return a Boolean. I opted not to go that route and to instead pass it a starting location, which will basically tell you whether it's a king or queen, or a king, a black king or white king. And then based on that, what you're going to get back is a collection of available castling moves that will either have 0, 1, or 2 moves. And the way that works is, let's say that everything is set up properly for castling, and I say, hey, castling status checker, what are my options from the king square? If everything's perfect and it's just the white king and 2 rooks and nobody's moved, then I'm going to get back the board coordinates 3, 1, and 7, 1. If something impedes one of those moves, then I'll just get back a collection with 1 board coordinate. And if, say, the king is moved or there are no rooks on the board or whatever, I will get back an empty collection. So what you're watching here is me kind of having loosely decided on that. And then you're going to see me start to get pretty excited about this, because for the first time, I've gotten to a point where I'm sort of greenfield again, which means I can go through my nice cycle of TDD. And you are seeing the code start to really bog down. And this is something you can see a lot in legacy projects, where it's no longer, hey, I'm going to reason about this thing and go back and forth the way it is if you're practicing TDD by, doing katas or something. You kind of get in the weeds and have to think through your design, and it gets complex. And there's this joy in finally figuring out a way to break out a seam that you can actually get at and test. And that's what I've got here. I've decided that I'm going to stop at this point putting off this grand refactoring of the board class and all its concerns for another time, because that turns the board class into what's called an iceberg class, where there's this like one entry point, and then there's all these scenarios I have to worry about that all go in through that entry point with a lot of private methods and stuff. Finally, I'm giving myself surface area to test here where it's nice and I can get back to my nice cadence and have relatively simple things to reason about, because I'm creating this new class. And I'm not worrying about all the other board logic in it and everything. It's pretty easy to set things up and then to make changes without worrying that I'm going to break things. So that can kind of be a guide for you if it's becoming, if you've been in a code base, especially a greenfield one, and you're going at it with TDD and it becomes more and more of a slog. That's probably a lesson and a smell that you ought to think about breaking apart your dependencies and getting at something you can test with a little bit more granularity. Just an observation based on my history and experience anyway. I will mention something here that's going to waste a decent amount of my time and yours in this episode and the beginning of the next, because I didn't come to a great stopping point here, so I just went ahead and plowed through and coded the next episode as well. This is kind of an Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi situation. This episode I ended where I didn't even push up to GitHub. I just committed, because I was really not in a great state at the end of this. And a lot of the heartburn here was caused by the fact that if you look, board coordinate 4811115. Okay. I believe they're right here. It's all caused by the fact that I cannot seem to keep my X and Y coordinates straight. So the black pieces are described by, they're backwards. So it should be, 1 over 1 in the X direction, 8 in the Y direction, or 8, 8, and then 5, 8. But I've transposed these things for Y specifically. Don't know why it only happened for 1, but I do know that it caused me to get into the debugger and absolutely not be able to reason this out. And that's so common, but it's so much better to catch it with your tests early on than for me to write this, grand implementation and then everything's going wrong and I'm overwhelmed and I go home and give up on life because there's 45 places in the code base that I may or may not have transposed things. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox and back to the present and narrate these tests a little bit. So the first one, I'm just saying that I'm starting off simply. I don't think I want a test eventually for the count of moves here. I mean, maybe I do, but instead of worrying about that, I know that I'll start off with this test where I'm saying, look, if I just call this thing where the king sits, then I should have, because in my setup here, I'm just putting nothing but kings and rooks on the board. I wonder if I ever figured out that should be 1-5-1. I don't know. Hopefully I got that right. But the idea, assuming I wasn't having basic struggles with, algebra level graphing, my idea here, this probably doesn't fix it. In fact, now I get this wrong, but at least I'll probably get away from having the black one instead of the white one. So yeah, comedy of errors, but sooner or later it all gets straightened out. But all I'm saying here is if I call this for where the white king is, whether or not I'm right about where the white king is, if I call this for where the white king is and I've moved nothing, I should get back 2 moves. And so what I was saying before is that's maybe a good starting point, but perhaps I want to later come and mark this test up, and instead of adding a new red test, turn this green test into a red test to make that test a little more valuable. I don't remember or not. It's not the worst, because it's true that if the board is empty except kings and rooks and nothing's moved, yes, there should be 2 castling moves for the white king. So there are worse tests. You can have some pretty degenerate test scenarios, but this one's sort of borderline. Now, as you can see here, I'm doing something that I pretty consistently do, which is go back and revisit names to make sure I'm getting things the way I want it. I want to be specific about what square I'm starting from. So here is a test where I get a little bit more, I guess, valuable or specific in terms of what my expectations are. So I'm saying, yeah, okay, so there should be 2 moves, but specifically there should be this move that comes back. And I had a cheating, kind of stupid implementation initially to get the first test to pass. And so I'm going to still, if memory serves, have sort of a cheating, stupid implementation, but a little bit less cheaty and a little bit less stupid. And I'm going to do... oh, you caught me there. I probably shouldn't have, or I definitely shouldn't have been doing that rename while I'm red, so my bad. It's hard for me. Naming is so important to me, and when I think of a name that I want, I just kind of want to get it in there. And for what it's worth, if you're brand new to this, I would really stick to the discipline. I might argue in my own defense that as a very experienced TDD practitioner, doing a refactoring like the Visual Studio or Code Rush rename refactor that is extremely low risk may not be the end of the world. It might be worth the teeny tiny risk that I take in order to not forget an opportunity, because there's also a risk in not renaming that thing. That may sound stupid. I mean, like, what does it matter? A variable name, it'll compile just the same. But you've seen before where I've left a stupid name in place and forgotten all about it, and then, who knows? I mean, they might still be in there where somebody comes along and has trouble understanding the method or misunderstands the method. And that's what I mean by a risk. So if a future maintenance programmer, whether it's me or anyone else, comes along, misreads a method while trying to add a feature or fix a defect, and gets it wrong, now we're not talking hypothetical. Like, there's a real risk to bad naming or to suboptimal naming. So there is a risk to refactoring while you're red. There's a risk to leaving a bad name in place. Life is full of trade-offs, and there aren't a whole lot of no-brainer easy decisions that you'll encounter, at least non-trivial ones. So all that being said, may sound like I'm making excuses, but I'm really not. I'm just philosophically, that was not right according to the red-green refactor approach. And I don't know that it's justified, but It's just an interesting philosophical consideration. So back to the matter at hand as this episode wears on. I did run a little bit over my 20-minute goal just in order to get to a spot where I felt good leaving off. But as this goes on, you can see me making this test a little bit smarter. So at first I was returning just any random coordinate. Then I'm returning one of the coordinates that actually I should be returning, and I'm just repeating it twice to keep that count test green. But now what I'm going to do, because I mean, I could also now just say like return a collection of 1, 3, and 1, 7, but you want to be moving your tests forward. So to me, the easiest thing now, at least from a conceptual standpoint, is, hey, King has got this built-in method that I'm looking at right here where I can actually get these castling moves, and I don't have to hard code anything. I can just say, hey, King, get me your moves. Now, of course, this is going to give me all of the King's moves. So that's why it's still red. Now I have to get specific, and what I'm looking at doing here is saying, okay, and this is still a little hacky, but it's less hacky. I'm going to say, get me the King's moves that aren't 1x, or I should say, get me the King's moves that are 2 moves away in the X direction, because I happen to know that those are going to be the 2 castling moves. Now, this is still somewhat ham-fisted, but like I said, it's a little bit more intelligent, and I'm now taking advantage of logic that I've already implemented elsewhere. This is the point where I get stuck, and I start to waste my time and yours, because the real problem here is that I'm consistently transposing this X coordinate. So I'm saying 1, 7, which is first column and then like the 7th row up the board. And what I really, so I'm thinking it's red because it's not maybe it's not compiling. I see that the auto whatever didn't move my parenthesis over, so I'm very confused. I eventually here I look at the clock winding on towards 20 and feel a little bit of pressure to finish up, and so I start to jump right into the debugger. The first thing I want to do is give myself this interim, and I think I'm going to make it go to list so that when I hit this point in the debugger, I can say, okay, what are all my moves? Plus, there's always the off chance that my deferred execution is causing some kind of problem. It isn't. Actually, the logic is completely correct, and I start to get an inkling of it finally when I step through in the debugger, and I think somewhere or another I see that there's a -1 value coming back for X, which indicates a bizarre problem, and in fact it indicates the problem that actually is taking place, which is that I'm transposing the coordinates. So that's not ideal, and but, you know, it's also very emblematic of the kind of things that go wrong when you're programming. A lot of times you're not making the big mistakes. You're not failing at a fundamental level to reason about things correctly. You're missing things that are, you know, obvious enough that you don't really think to look at them. And I think pretty much everyone can relate to that. So here I come in the debugger. I'm going to step through the next one and say, oh, okay, I've got all 7 moves, so that's expected. What's this? -1, 5. That's weird. This one seems also weird, but whatever. And then the rest of these I kind of stop looking at. If I had really kind of thought about it, I would have realized that none of those were the moves I would expect to see from a white king that hasn't moved. But my brain jumped kind of too quickly on the negative, which is the only... If your brain is in transpose mode, none of these really look problematic except this one. So you can imagine me there scratching my head thinking, man, what's wrong? And I'm 20 minutes into this episode and I have no idea. So, I don't know, this is something... You're also seeing me deal a little bit with... I don't know if this is the first episode where I'm using Studio 2015. There's some cool new things going on. I really like this Visual Studio, yet it is kind of confusing me at times or things are going wrong. We got another video series I'm actually doing now that if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can check out. Not yet. I have like 10 episodes of it I'm going to be uploading. Anyway, there I kind of delve more into, that's just me recording straight coding. Anyway, I play with the new features a little bit there. So here I am figuring out where it all went wrong. Starting location, X is 1. I think I'm pretty close to this starting to dawn on me. Staring at my screen in disbelief and confusion, 1, 5. But I'm probably, if I'm in transpose mode, still not really seeing it. I can't remember when the light came on exactly. Apparently there. So I fix that and I expect everything magically to go green, and then that doesn't happen. And then I start to think, gosh, maybe I did this transpose thing in some other places. Did I do it here? Yes, I sure did. Please notice it. I don't remember if I corrected this here or later. The cursor's right there. Yeah, there we go. So I started at 8-8 is probably fine, but this guy we want to be 5-8. This is also, by the way, another reason to refactor to a single thing, because now I'm not correcting that stuff in multiple places. But I will be correcting it again in these tests, because even though everything is going well, I forgot that I also transposed it in the assert statements. And I stepped through, and I think I realized it kind of in one. What's the starting location? That looks good. I remember exactly where I think there was a moment where I was like, oh, and then I hit stop, and I was like, okay. Yeah, there was nothing obvious from the video that made me figure it out, but I did, and this is where things are going to start to go green. And then in a hurry here, I said, oh, I'll wrap up this episode. We're about 22 minutes in, so I kept it reasonable. I thought for a minute about putting this into, this was actually the deciding factor. I thought about putting it into the prod code, but decided I didn't want to drag on any further, so I just checked Trello and then did a commit, and that's going to wrap it up here. Stay tuned for the next episode where we kind of finish on a better note and things hum along a little bit more smoothly. So until then, stay tuned, and I will catch you next time.